He was born in the splendor of Greenwich Palace on the 28th of June, 1491, a boy destined not for the throne, but for the background. Henry Tudor, the second son of Henry VII, was not supposed to rule. His elder brother, Arthur, carried the weight of dynasty on his thin shoulders. Arthur was meant to be king, trained in the arts of governance, taught diplomacy, discipline, and duty. Henry, by contrast, was free, educated in Latin and theology, yes, but more often found in the tilt-yard, throwing himself into justs, or in the chapel choir, his voice carrying like a clear bell. Those who saw him as a boy could not help but remark on his beauty. Tall, broad across the shoulders, with fiery auburn hair that caught the light like burnished copper, he seemed the very image of princely promise. His smile was magnetic, his energy infectious. He rode, hunted, played the lute, and composed verses with the ease of a Renaissance prince. Few doubted he would make a brilliant figure in the court of some future monarch, but few thought that monarch would be him. And yet fate has a cruel way of rearranging destiny. In 1502, Arthur, Prince of Wales, died suddenly, leaving young Henry as the heir to his father's crown. Overnight, the carefree boy became the hope of the Tudor dynasty. When Henry VII himself died in 1509, England celebrated the dawn of a new age. The 17-year-old prince was crowned Henry VIII, and the people cheered wildly. Where his father had been cautious, miserly, and paranoid, the new king was radiant, athletic, generous. He was the golden prince England had longed for. His first act was to marry his brother's widow, Catherine of Aragon, daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. The union seemed destined for greatness. Catherine was pious, intelligent, and dignified, Henry young and vigorous. For a time, the couple appeared genuinely in love. They presided over tournaments, feasts, and masques. England basked in the glow of Renaissance pageantry, and Europe looked on with admiration. But beneath the splendor, one concern haunted the king: the absence of a son. Catherine bore several children, but only one, Mary, survived infancy. To Henry, this was more than a private grief, it was a dynastic crisis. Without a male heir, the Tudor line might fracture, and the chaos of civil war could return. He began to see his marriage to Catherine not only as a personal disappointment, but as a sin. After all, had he not married his brother's widow? Was God punishing him for this forbidding union? And into this storm stepped Anne Boleyn. And was no ordinary court beauty. Dark-eyed, sharp-tongued, and ambitious, she was unlike the docile ladies Henry had taken to his bed before. She refused to be his mistress. She demanded marriage, demanded the crown itself. Henry was captivated, consumed. Here was a woman who tantalized him, who promised passion, and more importantly, who might give him the son he so desperately craved. But to marry Anne, Henry needed to rid himself of Catherine. And here began one of the greatest upheavals in English history. For years Henry petitioned the Pope for an annulment, but Rome refused. Catherine was the aunt of Charles V, the powerful Holy Roman Emperor, and papal politics would not bend to the English king's desires. Henry's frustration turned to fury. Was he not God's anointed sovereign? Why should a foreign priest dictate his private life? And so, with a stroke of defiance, Henry broke from Rome. Declaring himself supreme head of the Church of England, he seized control of religion itself. Monasteries were dissolved, their treasures confiscated. Those who opposed him, from humble monks to great lords, faced ruin, imprisonment, and often the executioner's axe. In this act of rebellion, Henry changed England forever. The Reformation had begun. Not as a spiritual awakening, but as the byproduct of a king's obsession. Anne Boleyn was crowned queen in 1533, and soon gave birth. But when the midwives' cries rang out in Greenwich Palace, it was not a boy who emerged, but a girl, Elizabeth. Henry concealed his disappointment, but his patience thinned. Anne, once enchanting, became sharp and nagging in his eyes. And when she failed to produce a son, her enemies struck. In May 1536, Anne was accused of adultery, incest, and treason, charges likely fabricated, but deadly nonetheless. She was imprisoned in the Tower of London. On the scaffold she held her dignity to the last, declaring her innocence before placing her neck upon the block. The French swordsman's blade fell, and with it, the Queen's head. The King, once mad with desire for her, now feasted at a banquet the night of her death. Yet even as wives came and went, Henry's desperation for a son did not fade. He married Jane Seymour, who gave him his longed-for heir, Edward. But Jane died shortly after childbirth, leaving Henry bereft. He took more wives, and of Cleves, discarded within months, Catherine Howard, beheaded for adultery, and finally Catherine Parr, who outlived him. 6 wives in all, 2 divorced, 2 executed, 1 dead in childbirth, 1 survivor. The rhyme of history: divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived, remains forever tied to his name. But it was not only his wives who felt the cruelty of Henry's reign. Friends, counselors, and statesmen fell as easily as queens. Sir Thomas More, who had once walked beside him as a trusted companion, refused to acknowledge Henry as head of the Church. For this he was imprisoned, tried, and beheaded. Thomas Cromwell, who had engineered the king's break with Rome, was later accused of treason and met the axe himself. Henry was both lion and butcher, charming and savage, rewarding loyalty one day and destroying it the next. As the years wore on, the Golden Prince became unrecognizable. The athletic youth who had once cut a dazzling figure in the jousting yard now grew monstrous in size. An accident during a joust left his leg injured, the wound never healing, festering into an ulcer that stank of rot. He gorged himself at feasts, his body swelling until he weighed over 400 pounds. Courtiers whispered of his temper, his rages, his cruelty. His once handsome face grew swollen and blotched, his eyes small and suspicious. To move his enormous body, mechanical hoists were required. Beneath his robes sores oozed and burst. He stank of death long before it claimed him. In his later years he raged like a caged beast. He accused his wives of betrayal, his ministers of treason, his subjects of heresy. The court walked on eggshells, fearful of the royal wrath. He demanded flattery, demanded obedience, demanded worship. He was king, head of church and state, master of all, but a prisoner of his own decaying flesh. By January 1547, Henry VIII was a dying man. He could no longer walk unaided. His body, bloated and purple with circulatory failure, was riddled with disease. He likely suffered from diabetes, gout, and heart failure. His leg ulcers festered, filling the royal chambers with their stench. He drifted in and out of consciousness, tormented by pain. On January 27th, in the Palace of Whitehall, the king who had once defied popes and reshaped nations finally succumbed. Henry VIII, the mighty Lion of England, was dead. But death did not grant him dignity. His corpse, swollen with rot, proved too heavy and unstable for the coffin prepared for him. During the funeral procession, in St. George's Chapel at Windsor, the coffin reportedly cracked open. Putrid fluid seeped onto the stone floor. Chroniclers tell of stray dogs lapping at the leakage. Whether myth or truth, the tale spread like wildfire. The great king reduced to carrion, his body devoured by scavengers. It seemed a fitting punishment, a grotesque echo of the gluttony and cruelty that had marked his reign. And yet, Henry's story does not end with his corpse. His legacy lived on in his children. Edward VI, a sickly boy, inherited his throne but died young. Mary, daughter of Catherine of Aragon, reigned briefly, restoring Catholicism with fire and blood, earning the name Bloody Mary. And Elizabeth, daughter of Anne Boleyn, ascended to the throne as Elizabeth I, one of the most iconic monarchs in history. She forged an empire, commanded an age, and immortalized the Tudor name. Henry VIII's reign remains one of history's most dramatic cautionary tales. To some, he was a visionary who freed England from Rome and laid the foundation of a Protestant nation. To others, he was a tyrant, consumed by lust and ego, who murdered wives and friends alike in pursuit of his own desires. He was both hero and monster, both Renaissance prince and bloated tyrant. He began as a golden youth, dazzling and beloved. He ended as a grotesque shadow, feared and despised. His life was one of grandeur and brutality, his death one of horror and humiliation. And perhaps that is why he endures. Because in Henry VIII we see the extremes of human ambition, the glitter of power, and the corruption it brings. He was a king who could defy the Pope, who could remake a church, who could shape the destiny of a nation, but he could not escape himself. In the end, Henry VIII's story is not only that of a king, but of a man. A man who wanted to be loved, feared, and remembered. A man who wanted a son, an heir, immortality. He gained much of it. His name, his wives, his deeds remain carved into history. But the price was blood, and his reward was a death as terrible as his appetites. The boy born in Greenwich Palace became the tyrant who remade England. The prince who shone like the sun became a king who rotted in his own flesh. His reign was a tapestry of triumph and terror, splendor and decay. And in the silence of his tomb, we are left with the image of Henry VIII, larger than life, larger than death, both lion and monster, warning and legend, forever haunting the halls of history.